Welcome to the Rex Andrews Show. Glad to have you. If you're a first-time listener, welcome to the program. Thanks for coming aboard. Take a listen, and of course, I'm never afraid to beg. I'm a well-dressed beggar, in fact. I'll always beg for 5 stars if you're willing to give us one. And for those who are returning listeners, thank you very much. Glad to have you in the conversation. Don't forget to comment. And of course, subscribe wherever you are. And don't be afraid to. I will beg for your ratings. So please, if you like the program, give us a 5-star. Okay, today, before we get started on our great guest today, I'm excited to have her on the show today. Let's get the house cleaning out of the way. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you are listening to the podcast. If you don't like the one you're on, there are 23 other choices to get your podcast from. We're out there everywhere we can think of. The program is listened to in 32 countries and on 6 continents. If we could figure out how to market to penguins, we would have them too. So anyway, thanks for joining. And of course, please do visit the show website because we have information, links, and photos and everything of everyone who comes on the show. So all of our previous guests, our guests today, and the upcoming guests. So it's a great place to get some information and then also see some of our fun sponsors and things we have cooking at the Rex Andrews Show. So that's just rexandrewsshow.com. Okay, fantastic. I always say this, I wear it out, but who cares? It's my slogan. I have too many interests for just one lifetime. And so around the corner is another discovery. So today, I want to introduce you to a discovery that I think is pretty fun. Glad to have her on the show. So she's been in the health and wellness industry for over 25 years. Some things she's done along the way and some expertise, a lot of focus on brain health, which those who know me and listened, that's a near and dear subject to me. As a yoga instructor and founder of a great new website and some great new things coming on. She's really exciting to have. And so I'd like to welcome to the show today, Cheryl McColgan. Cheryl, how are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks so much for having me.
Great to have you today. All right. What corner of the world are you joining us from today?
I am in Cincinnati, Ohio, and actually this is just a little fun fact that I think people will find amusing. I'm actually in my tiny little studio that's under the stairs. So if you look, I can put my hand on the ceiling. I can barely stand up in here, but it looks like a giant, wonderful space, right?
You've got to love the virtual world we're all in these days, and the fact that we can do all of our interviews and meet people via Zoom is fantastic. Okay. So Cheryl, if you could, for those who might be multitasking and playing along with us today, I was wondering if you could quickly just drop out your website or social media site so people can find you so they can play along while they're listening if they happen to be multitasking today.
Sure, that's great. I am Heal, Nourish, Grow on all social media, and that's the website as well, healnourishgrow.com.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So Cheryl, what we'd like to do on the show, if you've listened in and most everybody has a chance to take a look, we want to tell your story. We want to understand the human story behind all the great things you're doing. We are a sum total of where we've been, and a lot of that has to do with where we started. So we want to go back in your history, know about some things here so that, this isn't too hard to answer these questions. We want to know where you were born, where you grew up, if you have siblings, and then if the siblings you do have, if they survived your torment, what your parents have done for a living, because that also influences who we are and things that are we deal with as we grow and develop. Possibly some interests you had growing up as a kid. So things you did in your spare time, whether it was sports or dance or theater or shoplifting, whatever it happens to be, we can take a look at those things. Then we want to hopscotch through a little bit of your education and kind of see where influences and just the story behind Cheryl, and then we'll hop up to what you're doing in present day. So Cheryl, where were you born?
I was born in Louisiana in a small town called Rio, but it's very close to Bogalusa, which some people might know because it's, I think it has a military base there or something now. Anyway, people know about it a little bit more. So a lot of my family is French Cajun and lived in New Orleans. And so a wonderful influence of food in my life for a very young age, which fits nicely into kind of where we'll end up with this story later. But grew up in Louisiana, spent the first 5 years of my life there, grew up on a 50-acre farm, My dad built our house that I lived in when I was very young. We started out living in a trailer,
Okay.
like many people that don't have a lot of money in the South. But my dad built this beautiful house that we had as kids. And then later, as he was climbing the corporate ladder, we moved to Texas when I was about 6, and then eventually up to Northern Kentucky. But I would say that growing up on the farm and the way that I thought about food and health and being outdoors and all of those things, I was definitely influenced by that at a very young age. So I think it is interesting to go back and sometimes rehash some of these things. Like, how did I get to where I am now? Well, it's kind of a long and circuitous road, but it does actually make sense.
Sure. Now, do you have siblings?
I do. I have 2 sisters and a brother, and I am the oldest. So yes, when you mentioned they're being tormented later, and when I tell them to listen to this, I'm sure they'll be like, yes.
Well, I'm one of 4, and the rest of them also are still living, so I can relate to all that, but I'm only second in line. Okay, fantastic. So what did your mom do? Was your mom a homemaker? Did she work some? What was your mom's influence on you?
So very early on, she was mainly a homemaker, and like I said, we lived on a farm. So my dad was doing some like pig and cattle farming, but he was really a chemist by degree,
Okay.
and he had kind of an interesting upbringing. He was the first one in his family to go to college, and it was funny because he did actually drop out at one point, and he worked for a quarter or a semester of school in the shipyard.
Okay.
And actually got bit on the chest by a junkyard dog, was part of the, legend of the story. But anyway, quickly learned that working in the shipyard was very hard and difficult work.
Sure.
And that's not something that he wanted to do. So he went back to school and finished. And he was a very brilliant man. So
Okay.
got his undergraduate in chemistry. And then eventually when we moved to Texas, he went to school at night and got his master's degree, and then became very, successful in his career.
Okay. So with your siblings, how many years apart are your siblings? Are you fairly close in age?
2 of us are. So I'm the oldest, and then my sister Sheila, she's basically a year younger, 15 months younger. And then the other 2 are 6 and 7 years younger. So we kind of had 2 sets of kids, which was very interesting. In a lot of ways, I raised my brother and sister, and Sheila and I both did at different times. And certainly when they were very young, at the very least, we were helping a lot with that. So,
okay. So did you live on the farm all the years you're growing up, or what happened when you went over to Texas? How old were you when that took place?
Yeah, I believe I was about 6. We moved to Texas. So no farm anymore, sold the farm. Very sad. 50-acre farm, goodbye.
Yeah.
Of course, all of our grandparents and everything lived in Louisiana. So when we went to Texas, it was kind of just like our little family out on our own. We lived like in what we liked to call the professor's house, because I don't know for what reason my parents actually brought us with them when they were looking at houses. Maybe they had no sitters or had no choice, but we kept saying, we like the professor house. We like the professor house, because it was we lived right down the street from Texas A&M in Kingsville, Texas. So
okay.
I guess the previous owner was a professor at the college, so we kept calling it that.
Been through there. I've got a nephew that was a recent graduate, so he's an Aggie. So love that area. That's nice. Fantastic. Okay, so where do you consider home? Do you consider home there in Texas then? I mean, where did you go to high school?
Went to high school in Northern Kentucky. So my dad was kind of just climbing the corporate ladder. People always asked if he was in the military or something, because it seemed that we moved a lot, or at least we moved schools a lot, because also at different times, Texas public schools weren't that great. So we went to a Catholic school there as well as an Episcopal school there. And then when we moved up to Northern Kentucky, went to public schools there. But I basically lived in I live in Cincinnati now, but Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, we're just right across the river.
Yes,
so
yeah.
Lived in this general area now for, I don't know, 35, whatever years it's been. So I kind of really consider Cincinnati home now.
Cincinnati's home. Okay. All right. Well, that's good. Then what types of things did you do in your spare time as you were a kid and, up through high school and everything?
So I played a lot of sports. I was never fantastically awesome at any of them, but I've always been pretty active and athletic. And I also played the saxophone for 7 years, was quite good, was in my state tryouts and that kind of thing, and would make it into these advanced bands. But I was fortunate that I also had a brain, and my teachers really steered me away. Music was my passion, but they were all like, no, you're way too smart for that. You can't make any money in that.
Yeah.
So when it came time to, go to college and do that sort of thing, I kind of let music go. And I really only played a couple of times since then, which is a little sad, but because it was definitely my passion at the time.
Okay, so music was a passion. You played sports. So where'd you head off to school after high school? Did you go off to college then, or what did you do next?
I did, but this is where the story gets a little bit more interesting.
Okay.
So, because I had a little detour, so I ended up living on my own at 18. I was a good kid, but my parents had gotten divorced, and my mom was having all kinds of her own issues. And so at 18, I had scholarships, but I also had a boyfriend at the time. And so I picked a partial scholarship that was closer to home rather than going with one of the full scholarships that I should have gone with. But, life is a journey, right? So I took that partial scholarship, went through a semester there, but had to work so much, to support myself.
Right.
I couldn't really do very well in school. And my major was physics at the time because I was going into engineering. And it was just very difficult to try to, work basically full time and try to carry this course load. So I dropped out at that point. And then finally, when my first marriage, I had been married maybe a year or two, something like that. Went back to college when I was 26. And so that's when I then went into psychology and went to a year of graduate school focusing on, neuropsychology, more brain health stuff. So I did eventually finish. It just took me a little longer than the traditional route.
Well, in today's world, I don't even know what traditional education means. And I think I have met so many people who have been self-educated. I had recently a guest on the show who's in his mid-20s, and the guy went right into real estate right out of high school, has written books and all kinds of stuff. And so, it's just a different world than it was, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, where there's just so many options now. And I think it's great. I think it's a good thing. So, yeah, taking a little bit of time, that's okay. So, what type of work did you first start focusing on when you got out of school and stuff?
So I was in retail all through high school, worked for Victoria's Secret for, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years while I was all through high school. And then after I graduated, I kept that for a while kind of on the side. But then I started working in the financial services industry. So I worked at a brokerage firm where I acted as an assistant. And so got some familiarity with that space at the time. And then after I had gotten married, quit for a while so I could go back to school, which I finished. And then, like I said, went to grad school that I did not finish, but I went to grad school for a year, and that was still very valuable.
Right.
And then I had my own business for a while. And as we talked before we started recording, I actually had a podcast way back in 2005.
Yeah.
My business was an online e-commerce store called Diva Knitting. I sold luxury knitting supplies like yarn, needles, all that stuff online before that was even really a thing. I mean, there were online shops at that point, but there was no PCI compliance then. There was no Shopify where it makes it so easy to just get online. I had to actually download this open source cart system called ZenCart, which I think
yes, ZenCart. I'm a geek. ZenCart is still out there. And in fact, I know 2 of the developers. They're still there. Cool. It's unbelievable. Yeah, ZenCart's still around.
Yeah, so I used that and through forums and whatever, kind of customized it a lot myself. But so I had this online business where I actually had physical product and shipped everything myself, and really did quite well with it. And hindsight's 2020, right? But I'm really kind of sad that I let it go when I did, because if I would have just made a small jump in investment as far as inventory and possibly having a physical space, sure, I think I could have really taken that business to a very cool place. But
okay, so now I have to poke you in the eye a little bit here, because I heard something as I was listening to you describing your business. It was luxury knitting. Now, when on earth does anybody use luxury and knitting in the same sentence? Am I completely clueless on this?
I mean, yeah, a little bit.
Okay, that's fine. Fair enough.
So if you go to, say you go to a Walmart or a Michael's, or kind of the place where it's sort of like comparing, here's how I can compare it. It's like comparing a Walmart, like the clothes that Walmart carries to the clothes that, like, say, a Saks Fifth Avenue carries, right?
Okay.
There's just higher quality fiber, more luxurious fibers like silk and more like luxury fibers. And that was my niche. That's why I decided to focus on, because there were a few other online stores at the time that kind of were more like a big box kind of situation. Yeah. So I made that my niche to be focused on. And just because not a lot of people know this, I'll just throw this in there. There's this fiber called kiviute that comes from an Alaskan muskox. It's like the warmest fiber in the world. And I was like one of the only places that you could find that fiber online easily. So it was pretty cool.
Well, now I guess I've been corrected. Now I know that there is such thing as luxury and knitting in the same sentence, because I was under the impression that knitting was knitting, and I just have a picture of my mind, a little old lady sitting in a chair with a cat on her shoulder, running hooks, So anyway, all right, fantastic. So yeah, you did. That's interesting, because 2005, that would have put you just after the .com explosion. A lot of people had fallen, businesses had recovered, so there's a lot of good stuff there going on, and online business, and so yeah, that was a good era, good time. Seems like forever ago, but it's funny when you stop and look at online now, it's not much different. It really isn't. In so
a
many
little
ways.
Easier in some instances, but harder in others. Like we were talking about traffic earlier, which is what kind of both of our businesses are now based on, and that has definitely changed a whole bunch.
a whole bunch. Okay, so then what was next on the journey? How long did you keep that business open?
About 5 years. And the reason that I sold it and let it go, well, there was a couple of things at the time, but the main reason was I had done yoga since I had been in that college period, gone back, and had stayed with it over the years. I was a runner for like 17 years, had to give that up. My knees decided that was no longer a good thing. But so as that progression was happening, where I was having more physical problems and less ability to run, I got more and more into yoga. And then I decided I was going to take some yoga teacher trainings. And, I was traveling a fair amount with my first husband at the time. And it was just becoming more difficult for me to, physically ship product.
Yep.
And I really wanted to focus on yoga. So that was kind of natural for me, that I kind of had like a going out of business sale, and that was the end of that, and then started the new chapter.
Fantastic. Okay. So you got involved with yoga. Were you, I understand you started to teach after a while then, right?
Yeah, taught for many, many years, still occasionally teach kind of like more like private things now, but was, at local studios teaching, and worked also with my friend Catherine, who runs Yoga for Golfers. She's pretty internationally known, has written several books. And so for a couple of years, I was working with her as her director of business operations. So we were trying to, grow the Yoga for Golfers brand. And at the time that I was there, we launched an online training program, which was also actually pretty innovative at the time. Like, now there's a lot more platforms where you can easily deliver digital content. And when we did it, we kind of had to figure out a way to kind of like jank a bunch of stuff together to make it work, right? It just wasn't, there were no platforms for it like there are now. So that was really interesting. And we had a lot of fun, doing that for a while. And so that lasted for a few years that I worked with her. And then I was, teaching, of course, at the same time. And we would do trainings in Scottsdale in person, way before all this COVID nonsense, when you could still do stuff like that. So we would have in-person events. But so that was the next thing. And then my first marriage kind of went away. And so I had to go down a different path, because teaching yoga is amazing, but it's not the easiest way to make an actual living.
Yes.
and fortunately, I had some other skills that I could use, right? So in part, some of the things that I learned with Catherine about designing events and holding in-person events, I was able to get into another job as a content director for an international conference. We had about 2,000 tech-related people come to the conference every year, held other events all around the world. I got to travel to Australia and Germany and Amsterdam and Singapore, all for event-related stuff, and helped produce content, helped book the speakers,
Nice.
worked with the advisory board to, identify current trends, what we needed to have education on, and that kind of thing. So that was what was next.
So how did you, what was the pivot point that had you start the Heal, Nourish, and Grow?
Yeah, so that was close to that time. And I mentioned my divorce, so that was tough and, very stressful life event, obviously. And then having a new job on top of that, traveling a ton. I've always been focused on health and wellness, like my whole career, like we always talked about. But during those few years, I was really personally struggling. I was not taking care of myself. I was not meditating. I was not doing yoga. I was not sleeping very well. And so, and it's tough, right? Because it's like sometimes like the mechanics that car doesn't work. It's like I had all these tools and knew all of the things that I needed to be doing to keep myself not only physically healthy, but mentally healthy. And I wasn't doing it because I was overly stressed. And so the job that I had right after that one that we were talking about, the content direction, was actually, I was in a executive management position with a PR firm as the head of events. And it was just very stressful and very, it wasn't feeding my soul at all. And it was really stressing me out. And there was like kind of that the straw that broke the camel's back moment when I was doing this event planned in London for a big conference. And I had multiple stakeholders. There were like 3 different companies involved, and there was a big problem with it. And I just basically like literally broke down that day. I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I had bought that domain name, Heal, Nourish, Grow, probably about, at that point, I'd purchased that 4 or 5 years prior to that point, because I'd always had it in my heart and in my mind that that's what I was passionate about. And that's what I wanted to eventually make into my next business, but I just wasn't able to do it at the time because of my financial situation with the divorce and whatever. And so, so I already had that on the back burner. And so that day when I cracked, I talked to my now husband, who at the time was, I can't remember if we were engaged at that point or not, but I just talked to him about it. And we were definitely living together at that point. And I said, I just don't know if I can, I don't know if I can keep doing this. What do you think if I finally pursue Heal, Nourish, Grow? Because he knew about it. And so he was on board. And so then that's when I just decided to finally go for it. And obviously I gave notice at that job after I cracked that day, but that was kind of the end there.
So how would you describe Heal, Nourish, Grow? I've looked through your site. Do you consider it to be a lifestyle site? What you talk about a lot of things there. You have a lot of different aspects. So can you walk me through a little bit about what you really have put together with Heal, Nourish, Grow?
Yeah. So I would say, anything that kind of falls under those 3 categories for the site is kind of open season in my mind for me to produce content around or to promote. But really the very backbone of it, I would say, is ultimate wellness.
Okay.
I have an article on the site that's called "What is Ultimate Wellness?" And the beauty of that is that it's something a little different for everybody, but I kind of walk through, in that article about kind of finding out what that means to you, identifying what are your main goals in life, like overarching sort of themes that you might live your life by, for example. And so if you can really identify those very deeply core beliefs and then associate those core beliefs then with goals, 10-year, 5-year, 1-year, it really makes it a lot easier to stay committed to what you need to do every day to accomplish those. And I use diet as a big example for that, because a lot of people in the United States are in poor health. In fact, only 12% of Americans can be considered metabolically healthy. That means 88% of people are metabolically unhealthy, which is one of the big reasons why people are struggling so much with COVID outcomes. We keep seeing in the news, this headline that'll say a perfectly healthy, 40-year-old, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, they don't mention that that person was, 40 pounds overweight, had high blood pressure, had blood sugars in the diabetic range, not healthy at all.
Right.
And yet this is kind of how it's being, promoted in the media, which to me is very sad, because there's a pretty simple way that we could help people have better outcomes or have better immunity through just getting better health. And nobody's really talking about that.
Okay. So through your site there with Heal, Nourish, Grow, are you providing education, coaching, certain types of products, help the listeners who aren't on your site right now understand how you've made this into a business and how you're helping people?
Yeah, so it's all the above, everything that you just mentioned. Because of my background with an interest in brain and my just interest in research in general, I've always been passionate about, what do the studies say? What does the research say? What can I dig into? And I'll go quite easily on any given day down a rabbit hole of I'll hear something about, let's say, I don't know, I can't give you a good example, but maybe something like why is visceral fat one of the major things that's a risk factor for cardiovascular disease or for poor health outcomes. And so then I might go spend 3 hours digging through the research, learning about why visceral fat is this thing. And so because I do that anyway, like just as part of my nature, I'm like, I should start writing about some of these things and like go into it more in depth than, for example, Mind Body Green is a pretty popular, well-known like health and wellness kind of site. And at some day I would totally aspire to be in the same category. I'm not at all putting myself in the category, but they typically do kind of like quick fluff pieces, in my opinion, for the most part. I'm sure they do some more in-depth stuff, but that's just not what I personally am interested in. So I think the distinction is that the information I offer, I'm always going to give a lot of citations from the research. I'm going to throw in some of my personal experience, maybe some things that I've been listening to. I'm an obsessive listener of podcasts, mostly focused on health and wellness, but that's one of the ways I kind of keep up with the thought leaders and learn about what's the latest research, what are thought leaders looking at now as, things that we should be concerned about in health. So I will try to relay some of that stuff on the site. I also do recipe development. So I do have a lot of low carb recipes on the site. Not as many as I would like, but it's just me. And, there's only so many hours in a day.
That's right.
But you can find some good recipes on there. And then in addition, I also, of course, talk about some of the other practices I've been involved in my whole life, like, yoga, meditation. So to me, that is all part of heal, nourish, and grow your body, your mind, your soul. To me, it's all tied together. And I don't think you can, really be fully healthy without all of those aspects. So that's kind of why it seems on the surface that it's like maybe a lot of stuff. But to me, it all ties together into what I consider ultimate wellness. And so again, that's kind of the backbone of it.
Okay. So looking back from where you are today to all the way back to when you were a kid, is there anything that you really attribute that you could attribute to your success, or things that you learned you'd say, well, I would do this differently than I did today? So just looking back over your whole life, because one of the things I always go down this path is because a lot of people out there have ideas or like you, they might have something they've been thinking about. They've just never done it, right? They just haven't taken that step. So looking back, what would you do different? And what from your past has added to your success today?
I don't know that there are a lot of things that I would do different. Well, other than maybe take that full scholarship for college when I was 18. But, it's kind of silly to look at those things because you can't go back, right? You can only learn from what you've done. But I will say, I think that some of the things that contributed to my success were my upbringing. So my dad, who I mentioned before, he was always into fitness and health before that was even a popular thing. He was, he ran, I was born in 73. So as long as I can remember, he was always being a runner. So that was like right around the running boom. He would take us to the health food store to get a treat. Like health food stores were kind of just starting to be a thing then. And that we grew up on a farm. So we were always eating real whole foods. There was no cereal in my house. There were no sodas. This all sounds like weird to people now, but it's like, we were poor and we grew up on a farm. So what did we eat? We ate the stuff that came out of our garden and the hogs that we butchered and, the meat that was from my grandpa's, cattle farm or whatever, that's what we ate. So we ate whole, real foods. And I'm not going to say I never ate garbage my whole life, because by the time I could drive, and my sister and I kind of joked about that we were like, oh my God, now we can go get all the junk food, and get things that wouldn't typically be, in our house. So I do think that had a huge influence on me as far as being very aware of and involved with health and wellness. And then, I became a runner when I was like 19 and did that for many, many years. So all of those things like definitely contributed to my views and my interest in health and wellness. But then also just success-wise, I always think, my parents were very strict. We always worked very hard. We always knew that it was expected that we get good grades, that study hard, that we weren't going to have college. We didn't have college funds. We didn't have any of that. If you want to go to college, you work hard, do well, get a scholarship. That was the deal. So I do think that those early lessons around work and about work ethic really, and the nice thing I do remember, it's like funny, I don't remember a lot of stuff from my childhood, but I do definitely remember that both of my parents always said that we could do whatever we wanted, like as far as like being successful in life. There were no like gender role sort of things. And as the firstborn, I think my dad always wanted me to be a boy, but I wasn't. Right. And, but it was always like that we could be whatever we wanted, or we could do whatever we wanted. So I think that also helped. Just it never occurred to me not to try any of the things that I did, because I just was like, okay, well now I'm going to open this business, and I didn't know anything about it, but I'm like, but I'll learn. I can figure it out. I know I can figure it out. And so, so I definitely think some of those factors have influenced and contributed to kind of where I got to now. Like I said about the food thing, eventually matching up with what I do now. It's like a long circuitous road, but it kind of makes sense when you know the backstory.
So just an oddball question that comes to my mind. You obviously, the way you speak about what you're doing today with, Heal, Nourish, and Grow, Heal, Nourish, Grow, you actually obviously have a huge passion for that. So did you have a huge passion for luxury knitting back in the day?
Did at the time. Okay. I mean, my gosh, if you even go, there's this site called Ravelry. Again, this was like an amazing thing at the time, because I guess there was Facebook. I can't remember what year Facebook started, but Ravelry was basically a Facebook for crocheters and knitters. And you wouldn't even believe that there are this many people in the world that are that into it, but there are.
Well, I don't think you had to worry about Mark Zuckerberg, stepping into that space very well. Yeah, I don't think so.
No.
So, okay, well, it's good. So you're consistent on your passion for doing those things. So what's next? What's next on the horizon for you with Heal, Nourish, Grow? I mean, I know when you have a lifestyle site like that, and you're talking about this, ultimate wellness and these types of things, that's almost unlimited amount of topics. But what do you see is next for you?
So, I try to help people as much as I can on a day-to-day basis, just through social media. I offer a ton of free content, both through my site, through videos that I put out on various topics, through the podcast that I'm launching here shortly, as soon as I can get all the editing done. So I'm always going to be about providing a lot of free information and just sharing my passion. Okay. But what I would like to do next professionally is to create some things that I can help people on a wider basis. So for example, before we started recording, we were kind of talking about digital products or digital training. That's something that I've started experimenting with this year. I did a free webinar. I have this other platform that I'm working with where I can, produce content and, charge people like a class, for example. Sure. So one of the webinars I did was how to get started with keto, like how to get started even just eating better, like how to kind of make that slow progression. So just things like that. And I don't know, I hate to even say it because I'm going to put it out there though, because that's how things come to be, right? But I have been working on a book for a while. Okay. And so if what's next, if that could get accomplished, that would make me very happy. It's just a long, slow process.
So on your new podcast, is that also going to be the Heal, Nourish, Grow then, I'm assuming?
So it is obviously a product of Heal, Nourish, Grow, but I'm calling it Keto for Life podcast because it's really, at this point, I've been low carb for over 5 years, keto for over 4. The benefits that I've seen from it, the benefits that I see it creating in others and the people that I've worked with, I just don't ever see myself really, unless I learned some research that, that really we need to go down another path, because that's how I eventually got on this path, was following the research. And so I'm always open to change. But what I want to do in that podcast is, like, I listen to a ton of them. There are several about low carb or keto space, but what I wasn't hearing as much of is just kind of practical information from people who have done this lifestyle long term. Because what I hear in the media a lot is you'll hear, but it's not sustainable, or that's why doctors aren't promoting it to, even though it is like basically a cure for diabetes. We're not allowed to say cure, but
sure.
Even though that's the case, it's not being promoted because doctors that have never experienced it for themselves, they don't think it's sustainable. And that's what you keep hearing repeated over and over again. And yet in my small little world, I know plenty of people that have been doing this lifestyle for years and years, some of them up to 20 years even already. And so it is sustainable. It's the way to ultimate health. It's the way that we've evolved to eat, is to just eat whole foods. We're not evolved to eat all this stuff out of a box. That's why it's causing so many health problems.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. I don't understand why anybody would think that keto, and I'm not an expert on it like you would be, but I don't understand why people would think keto is not sustainable, because that's how we ate before we started, being agricultural based.
Exactly.
You eat meat and you eat vegetables and what else?
There's
nothing else. Nuts, meat, and vegetables. What else? That's it. So, the whole idea around sustainability about that, I think, is kind of silly, because I think human beings as animals probably ate that way for probably 100,000 years or more.
Exactly. And so it is funny that is what we're fighting in the space, though. But I've heard it so much that I'm just like, well, I want to try to get it to people. The only problem is the podcast being named Keto is, unless somebody has that in their mind that they might want to try it, they might never stumble across it. But really, if people outside of the space would listen to it, they might get the idea that, like, oh, I could make these changes and I could make it sustainable, and I could actually do this. Because a lot of people are like, oh, I could never give up my bread, or I could never give up my pasta.
Right.
But again, it also makes it easier when you identify your why, if you're looking to be healthy and to live not only a long life, but a productive, like, feel good while you're living life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, I appreciate you coming on today and introducing us to Heal, Nourish, Grow, your backstory, how you grew to where you are today. And so my last question, which I ask most every guest, and if you've listened to my podcast, you probably know what's coming here. So we all have this concept of a bucket list. In fact, I've met the bucket list guy. He's down in Australia, Trav Bell. Anyway, there's always an opposite to everything in the world, right? So bucket list of things I want to accomplish before I go, and then there's a list of things that I don't even care about, I don't want to do. And it rhymes with bucket and starts with an F, but I'm not going to say that. So what might be on your F-it list? Something that you're just not going to do. And it can be something as simple, like, for me, I'm not eating sardines. Tried them once. Nah, not going back. Okay. Not going to travel back to Mexico City. Had a terrible experience in Mexico City. Sorry, folks. Great city. Really dirty place, not my place to go, not going back. So those might be 2 on my list. What might be something on your F-it list?
Just so, I should have thought more about this, but since I should have known it was coming. But I mean, I have plenty on the bucket list part one.
Well, sure, yeah. Well, see, and next time someone asks you what's on your bucket list, you're going to think about this conversation.
Yeah,
no one's asked you about an F-it list. And what might be something just simple? Hey, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, I'll never be vegetarian again. I won't do it. I don't believe in it. I don't think it's the proper human diet. There's a lot of dogma and a lot of, kind of promotion of the vegan agenda and vegetarian agenda, but I think it's kind of funny how they shame people. I'm not trying to offend anybody that's not vegan, but
Sort of militant about the whole thing, but okay, that's a good one. All right, I'll take that. Okay. Anything else that comes to your mind that might be on your effort list?
I don't know. I mean, I kind of one of those people that I'm like, never say never because
Okay.
because it's come to bite me a few times.
Well, then that's good to know. Say the never say never is on your list. You're going to be that.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming on today and being transparent, sharing us your story. It helps a lot of people when they get to hear other people who are doing great things in their lives share their story and see how they got there. Because for some reason, there's a lot of people who just think that success falls out of the sky, and it never does. It just never does.
No, in fact, sometimes when I tell people my backstory or the jobs and the things that I've done, they're like, how in the world did you get there? Like,
Yeah.
it all does tie together. The content related part has been, part of my life for my whole adult life, basically producing content, writing, all that stuff. So
fantastic. Well, thanks for coming on. Enjoyed having you. And we'll check back in with you. We'll get you on the show again, see how things are progressing. And so again, thanks for coming on.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Okay. All right, folks, that'll be it for today. We'll call it a wrap on this episode. Don't forget to stop by rexandrewshow.com so you can check out the bios from all of our guests, including Cheryl today. Remember to these three things I say every time. Be safe, be bold, and make it a great day.